Right now, as you're watching this video, your brain is lying to you. Not in small ways, but in fundamental ways that shape every decision you make, every relationship you form, and every memory you cherish. You believe you're in control of your thoughts. You think your memories are accurate recordings of past events. You assume you know why you do what you do. But psychological science has revealed something unsettling. Most of what drives human behavior happens beneath the surface of conscious awareness, and the stories we tell ourselves about our own minds are often elaborate fictions. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to explore the psychological facts that explain why humans think, feel, and behave the way they do. These aren't just interesting trivia, these are the operating principles of the human mind, the hidden rules that govern everything from why you're attracted to certain people to why you can't stop checking your phone, from why groups of intelligent people make terrible decisions to why your childhood still controls you in ways you don't realize. Some of these facts will make you uncomfortable. Others will explain patterns in your life you've never understood. All of them will change how you see yourself and everyone around you. This is your brain, unfiltered and exposed. Let's begin. Let's start with something fundamental. The voice in your head, the constant narrator commenting on your life, making plans, having opinions. That voice feels like the essential you, doesn't it? The consciousness observing your life from behind your eyes. Here's the psychological fact. That narrator is not your decision maker. It's your decision explainer. Studies in neuroscience, particularly the famous experiments by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s, showed that your brain begins initiating actions about half a second before you become consciously aware of the decision to act. Your consciousness is experiencing a slightly delayed broadcast of decisions already made by unconscious processes. The narrator in your head is essentially a press secretary, spinning stories about decisions the government already made. This creates what psychologists call the introspection illusion. When you are asked why you did something, your conscious mind immediately fabricates a plausible explanation, and you believe it completely. But research shows that people are consistently wrong about their own motivations. In one classic experiment, people were shown pairs of identical stockings and asked to choose which one they preferred. They always chose the rightmost item due to unconscious bias, but when asked why they chose it, they invented reasons about superior quality or color. When researchers pointed out the items were identical and asked if position might have influenced them, people insisted absolutely not. They were certain their invented reasons were real. This happens constantly in your life. You're attracted to someone and you tell yourself it's because they're funny or smart, when research shows you probably responded to unconscious factors like symmetrical facial features, pheromonal compatibility, or the fact that they slightly resemble your opposite sex parent. You make a purchase and convince yourself you needed it, when you were actually responding to artificial scarcity cues and anchoring effects deliberately designed into the marketing. You take a job and tell yourself it's about career growth, when you were unconsciously swayed by how much you liked the interviewer during a 30-minute conversation. Your narrator is constantly making up stories, and you believe every single one. Now here's where it gets even stranger. Your memories, the foundation of your identity, the record you use to understand who you are, they're not recordings, they're reconstructions, and every time you remember something, you change it. This is called memory reconsolidation. When you recall a memory, your brain doesn't play back a video file. It rebuilds the memory from fragmentary pieces, and in doing so, it's vulnerable to modification. Whatever you're thinking or feeling while remembering something gets incorporated into the memory itself. This is why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable, despite feeling so certain. This is why siblings remember the same childhood event completely differently. This is why your memory of your wedding day, or your graduation, or your first kiss has probably changed dozens of times since it happened. Elizabeth Loftus, one of the leading researchers in false memory, has demonstrated that you can implant completely fictional memories in people's minds with surprisingly little effort. In one study, she convinced 25% of participants that they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child, even though it never happened, simply by having family members suggest it might have occurred. The participants didn't just agree it happened, they elaborated on the false memory, adding details and emotions that felt completely real to them. Your memories are not a faithful record of your past. They're a story you're constantly rewriting, and you can't tell the difference between the real and the fabricated. This brings us to something psychologists call confabulation. When people experience brain injuries that damage their memory systems, they often invent elaborate explanations for things without realizing they're making it up. But here's the disturbing part. Healthy people do this constantly. In split brain patients, people who've had the connection between their brain hemispheres severed to treat epilepsy, researchers can show information to only one hemisphere. When the nonverbal right hemisphere is shown a command like stand up and the person stands, the verbal left hemisphere, which didn't see the command, immediately invents a reason. The person might say, I stood up because I wanted to stretch, or I needed to get a drink. They genuinely believe this explanation. Their brain cannot tolerate not knowing why they did something, so it instantly creates a plausible story. You do this every single day. When you feel inexplicably anxious, you look around for something to blame it on. When you're in a bad mood, you attribute it to something that happened, even though it might be low blood sugar or lack of sleep. When you make an intuitive decision, you reverse engineer logical reasons for it. Your brain is a storytelling machine that cannot tolerate uncertainty about its own operations, so it constantly generates narratives, and those narratives feel like truth. Let's talk about something called choice blindness. In experiments, researchers showed people pairs of photos of faces and asked them to choose which one they found more attractive. After they chose, the researcher would hand them the photo, but through sleight of hand sometimes gave them the photo they didn't choose. Then they asked people to explain why they chose that photo. Astonishingly, most people didn't notice the switch, and they readily explained why they preferred the face they had actually rejected moments earlier. They generated completely sincere explanations for a preference they never had. When the deception was revealed, people were shocked. They were absolutely certain they had chosen the photo they were holding. This reveals something profound about human psychology. You don't have as much access to your own mind as you think you do. You're not the author of your thoughts, you're the audience. Your unconscious processes are running the show. Your emotions are often mysterious even to you. Your memories are unreliable, and your explanations for your own behavior are frequently fiction. The self you think you know intimately is largely a construction, a story your brain tells itself to create a coherent sense of identity. Now you might be thinking, if all of this is true, does anything I think or feel actually matter? Of course it does. But understanding these psychological facts means you can start questioning your own certainty. When you're absolutely sure you're right about something, remember that your brain is designed to make you feel certain even when you're wrong. When you remember something vividly, remember that vividness is not the same as accuracy. When you think you know exactly why you did something, remember that your narrator is often making it up. This awareness doesn't diminish you. It liberates you to make better decisions by recognizing the limitations of your own mind. Let's move into how other people hijack these systems. Every interaction you have with another person is a psychological manipulation, and that's not necessarily sinister. It's just how social influence works. But some people understand these mechanisms and use them deliberately. The first principle of influence that controls you is reciprocity. When someone gives you something, even something small and unwanted, you feel psychologically compelled to give something back. This isn't conscious. It's a deeply wired social instinct that evolved because reciprocal relationships helped our ancestors survive. But in modern life, it's exploited constantly. Free samples at the grocery store aren't about letting you try the product. They're about triggering reciprocity so you feel obligated to buy. When a waiter brings you a mint with the check, tips increase by 3%. If they bring you a mint, start to walk away, then come back and give you another mint while making eye contact and saying this one's for you, tips increase by 20%. The value of the mint is negligible. What you're responding to is the gift and the personalization, which triggers a reciprocity impulse you cannot consciously resist. Salespeople know this. They give you something small, information, time, a free consultation, knowing that you'll feel psychologically indebted. That feeling of indebtedness is stronger than you realize, and it influences decisions you believe are rational. The second principle is commitment and consistency. Once you take a position, especially publicly, you'll go to irrational lengths to appear consistent with it. In one study, researchers went to a beach and asked people to watch their belongings while they went for a walk. When a Confederate later came and pretended to steal the radio, 95% of people who had agreed to watch the belongings intervened, compared to only 20% of people who hadn't been asked. The small commitment to watch belongings turned ordinary people into active guardians. This is why salespeople try to get you to say yes to small things first. Every yes makes you more likely to say yes to the big ask, because you want to be consistent with your previous behavior. This is also why people stay in failing relationships, dead-end jobs, or pursue degrees they've lost interest in. They've already invested time, money, and identity. Admitting it was a mistake feels like admitting you were wrong about yourself. So instead, you rationalize. You tell yourself it will get better. You find reasons to stay. You escalate commitment, throwing good money after bad. Because the alternative is acknowledging that your previous decisions were errors. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy, and it's responsible for massive amounts of human suffering and wasted resources. Your need to be consistent with your past self often keeps you trapped in situations your present self knows are wrong. Social proof is the third major influence mechanism, and it's arguably the most powerful. Humans are herd animals. When you're uncertain about what to do, you look at what others are doing and assume that's correct. This instinct kept your ancestors alive. If everyone suddenly runs, you run too. Don't wait to see the predator. But in modern life, this creates cascading effects where everyone is following everyone else and no one is actually leading. Laugh tracks on television shows work because hearing others laugh makes you more likely to laugh and perceive the content as funny. Bartenders salt their tip jars at the start of shifts because seeing money in there signals to customers that tipping is normal and expected. Advertisers use testimonials and claims like most popular or best selling because people assume if others are buying it, it must be good. But social proof gets truly dangerous in what's called pluralistic ignorance. This is when everyone in a group privately rejects a norm but assumes everyone else accepts it, so they go along with it publicly. This is how toxic workplace cultures persist. Everyone privately thinks the long hours are unreasonable, but everyone sees everyone else staying late, so they assume they're the only one who has a problem with it. This is how abusive relationships sometimes get tacit social acceptance. Everyone in a friend group might privately think someone's partner is terrible, but no one speaks up because they assume if it were really bad, someone else would have said something. Entire societies can be held hostage by norms that most people privately disagree with, simply because everyone is looking to everyone else for cues about what's acceptable. Authority is another profound influence vector. The Milgram experiments in the 1960s revealed something terrifying about human nature. Researchers had ordinary people deliver what they believed were increasingly powerful electric shocks to another person, in reality an actor, simply because a person in a lab coat told them the experiment required it. 65% of participants delivered the maximum shock, 450 volts, labeled danger severe shock, despite hearing screams of pain and protests from the other room. These weren't sadists, they were normal people who felt uncomfortable, but continued because an authority figure told them to proceed. When interviewed afterward, participants were distressed by what they'd done, but in the moment, the presence of authority overrode their moral intuitions. You are susceptible to this same force. When a doctor recommends a treatment, how often do you seek a second opinion or do independent research? When a boss asks you to do something unethical, how much pressure does it take before you comply? When a police officer gives you a command, even one that violates your rights, how likely are you to obey? Authority figures trigger deep psychological deference mechanisms. You're wired to assume they know better, that they have information you don't, that challenging them is dangerous. This instinct made sense in hierarchical tribal societies, but in complex modern systems, blind deference to authority enables atrocities. Now let's talk about scarcity and how it controls your behavior. When something becomes less available, you want it more. This has nothing to do with the actual value of the thing. It's a psychological reaction to potential loss. In one study, researchers gave people cookies in jars. When the jar was full, people rated the cookies a certain level of quality. When the jar only had 2 cookies, the exact same cookies were rated as significantly more desirable and higher quality. The scarcity made them seem more valuable. This is why limited time offers work. This is why exclusive clubs are desirable. This is why people camp out for product launches. The psychology of scarcity hijacks your rational evaluation of value. Dating and relationships are absolutely driven by scarcity psychology. People who are less available are perceived as more attractive. The entire dating advice industry is built on the premise that you need to be available to be attractive. The entire dating advice industry is built on manufacturing scarcity. Don't text back immediately. Don't always be available. Create the appearance of options, even if you don't have them. It's manipulative, but it works because human psychology is wired to pursue what seems scarce and take for granted what seems abundant. Liking is a more obvious influence factor, but the mechanisms are less obvious than you think. You're more likely to comply with requests from people you like, obviously. But what makes you like someone? Physical attractiveness is one factor, and the halo effect means attractive people are assumed to be more intelligent, competent, and trustworthy, even though there's no correlation. Similarity is another factor. You like people who are like you, who share your background, interests, opinions. This is why salespeople are trained to mirror your body language, speech patterns, and interests. They're manufacturing similarity to trigger liking. Compliments work, even when you know they're manipulative. Studies show that compliments increase liking even when people know the complimenter has an ulterior motive. Your brain rewards you for receiving compliments regardless of their sincerity. Familiarity breeds liking through mere exposure effect. The more you are exposed to something, the more you tend to like it, even if you're not consciously aware of the exposure. This is why advertising works through repetition. This is why you end up liking songs you initially hated after hearing them enough times. This is why people often end up dating coworkers or classmates, not because workplaces and schools are ideal for romance, but because repeated exposure creates familiarity, which creates liking. Your preferences are being shaped by exposure patterns you're not tracking consciously. Now let's explore something darker. How your mind protects itself from uncomfortable truths through cognitive dissonance. When you hold 2 contradictory beliefs, or when your behavior contradicts your beliefs, you experience psychological discomfort. Your brain will go to extreme lengths to resolve this discomfort, and usually it does so not by changing behavior, but by changing beliefs. In the classic cognitive dissonance study, researchers had people perform an incredibly boring task for an hour. Afterward, one group was paid $20 to tell the next participant the task was interesting. Another group was paid $1 to tell the same lie. Later, when asked how interesting they actually found the task, the $1 group rated it as significantly more interesting than the $20 group. Why? The $20 group could justify lying for good money. The $1 group couldn't justify lying for so little, so they resolved the dissonance by convincing themselves the task actually was somewhat interesting. They changed their memory and perception to align with their behavior. You do this constantly, you buy something expensive, and Immediately start emphasizing its positive qualities and minimizing its flaws, because admitting you wasted money creates dissonance. You stay friends with someone who treats you badly and tell yourself they're going through a hard time, because admitting you're tolerating mistreatment contradicts your self-image as someone with boundaries. You vote for a politician and then selectively consume media that confirms they're doing a great job, while dismissing criticism as biased, because admitting you might have chosen wrong creates unbearable dissonance. Your mind is constantly editing reality to protect your ego and maintain internal consistency, and you're completely unaware it's happening. This connects to something called the fundamental attribution error. When you observe someone else's behavior, you attribute it to their personality. When you observe your own behavior, you attribute it to circumstances. If someone cuts you off in traffic, they're an asshole. If you cut someone off, you were distracted or in a hurry, or they were going too slow. If someone is poor, you assume they're lazy or made bad choices. If you're struggling financially, it's because of the economy or bad luck or systemic issues. This double standard is automatic and unconscious. You judge others by their actions and yourself by your intentions. You see others as consistent characters and yourself as a complex person responding to situations. This error has massive social implications. It's why people lack empathy for groups they're not part of. It's why poverty, addiction, and mental illness are stigmatized. It's why people believe in the just world fallacy, the idea that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. If you see people as responsible for their outcomes due to their character, you don't have to feel guilty about inequality or motivated to change systems. You can tell yourself everyone has what they earned. But research consistently shows that circumstances, luck, and systemic factors matter far more than most people's internal narratives acknowledge. Your success is probably less about your merit than you believe, and others' struggles are probably less about their failings than you assume. Let's talk about how groups make you stupid. Individual people can be reasonably rational, but put those same people in a group, and collective intelligence often plummets. This happens through several mechanisms. First is groupthink, where the desire for harmony and conformity leads groups to make irrational decisions. When everyone around you seems to agree, you suppress doubts and go along. You don't want to be the dissenter, the troublemaker, the one who derails consensus. This is how teams of intelligent people make catastrophic decisions. Everyone privately has concerns, but no one voices them because the group momentum is toward a particular choice. The Bay of Pigs invasion, the Challenger disaster, countless corporate failures happened because smart people in groups suppress their individual judgment to maintain group cohesion. Risky shift is another group phenomenon. Groups often make riskier decisions than individuals would make alone. When responsibility is diffused across multiple people, everyone feels less personally accountable. The group's collective confidence creates an illusion that the risk is manageable. This is why committees often approve projects that any individual member would reject. This is why mobs do things no individual member would do alone. The group context transforms individual psychology, lowering inhibitions and amplifying extreme positions. Social loafing means people exert less effort when working in groups than when working alone. When your individual contribution can't be clearly measured, you unconsciously slack off. This isn't necessarily laziness. It's a rational response to a situation where your effort is diluted. But it means groups are often less productive than the sum of their individual members should predict. Every meeting you've been in where half the people weren't really contributing, that's social loafing in action. And you've done it too, more often than you realize. De-individuation happens when group membership makes you lose your sense of individual identity. In crowds, uniforms, or online mobs, people do things they never would if they felt personally identifiable. The anonymity of the crowd removes normal social restraints. This is why riots happen. This is why online harassment is so prevalent. This is why people in armies or police forces sometimes commit atrocities that would horrify them as individuals. The group identity temporarily overrides personal morality and individual accountability. Now let's explore something particularly uncomfortable. Your political and moral beliefs are probably not the result of rational thought. Research by Jonathan Haidt and others has shown that moral judgments happen instantly and emotionally, and reasoning comes afterward to justify the judgment you already made. When you encounter a moral question, your brain renders an instant gut verdict, and then your conscious mind generates arguments to support it. This is why political debates are almost never productive. You're not exchanging reasons that might change minds. You're exchanging rationalizations for positions you arrived at emotionally. In one study, researchers gave people vignettes describing harmless but disgusting scenarios, like siblings who have protected sex once out of curiosity, or someone who uses an old flag to clean their bathroom. People overwhelmingly said these actions were morally wrong, but struggled to explain why. They'd start with arguments, realize those arguments didn't actually apply, but still insist the action was wrong. They'd say things like, "I don't know why, I can't put it into words, but it's just wrong." This is called moral dumbfounding, and it reveals that, your moral sense is driven by emotional reactions, particularly disgust, not rational principles. This explains political polarization. People on different sides aren't working from different facts toward different conclusions. They're having different emotional reactions and then selectively gathering facts to support the emotional position. This is why fact-checking rarely changes minds. This is why more education doesn't necessarily make people more politically moderate. Smart people are better at rationalizing their emotional positions, not more likely to override them. Your political identity is tribal. It's part of your self-concept, and your brain will protect it just like it protects any other part of your identity. Changing political views requires not new information, but a shift in identity and social belonging, which is vastly more difficult. Let's discuss how your expectations create your reality through the placebo effect and self-fulfilling prophecies. The placebo effect is well known in medicine. Fake treatments produce real improvements because the belief that you're being treated activates your body's healing mechanisms. But placebos work even when you know they're placebos. In one study, patients with irritable bowel syndrome were given sugar pills in bottles clearly labeled placebo, and they still experienced significant improvement compared to the no treatment group. The ritual of treatment, the expectation of improvement, the attention from a medical professional, all of these activate psychological and physiological processes that create real effects. This extends far beyond medicine. In education, the Pygmalion effect shows that teachers' expectations of students significantly impact student performance. When teachers were randomly told certain students were likely to bloom intellectually, those students showed greater IQ gains over the year, even though they were chosen randomly. The teacher's expectations changed how they interacted with those students, and those subtle changes, more attention, more encouragement, higher quality feedback, transformed the student's actual performance. Your expectations of others literally shape who they become. Self-fulfilling prophecies work the same way with yourself. If you believe you're bad at math, you approach math with anxiety, which impairs performance, which confirms your belief, which increases anxiety. The belief creates the reality it predicts. If you believe you're unlikable, you approach social situations with defensiveness and self-consciousness, which makes you actually less likable, confirming your belief. If you believe your partner is losing interest, you become clingy or distant, which actually pushes them away, confirming your fear. Your brain is constantly looking for evidence that confirms what you already believe, and in doing so, it often creates that evidence. Confirmation bias is perhaps the most important bias to understand because it touches everything. You don't seek truth. You seek confirmation of what you already believe. When you encounter information consistent with your beliefs, you accept it uncritically. When you encounter information that contradicts your beliefs, you scrutinize it heavily, and usually find reasons to dismiss it. This happens automatically and unconsciously. You genuinely believe you're being objective, but research shows people evaluate identical evidence differently based on whether it supports their prior beliefs. In one study, people read about a scientific study on the death penalty's deterrent effect. Half read a study showing deterrent effects, half read a study showing no deterrent effect. Death penalty supporters who read the pro-deterrent study found it convincing and well-designed. When they read the anti-deterrent study, they found methodological flaws and dismissed it. Death penalty opponents did the exact opposite. Same evidence, evaluated completely differently based on prior beliefs. And here's the kicker. After reading both studies, people on both sides were more convinced of their original position than before. Exposure to contradictory evidence didn't moderate views, it polarized them. Each side accepted the confirming study and rejected the disconfirming study, coming away thinking the evidence clearly supported their side. This is why your media diet matters more than you realize. If you consistently consume sources that confirm your worldview, you're not becoming informed, you're becoming entrenched. Your brain is building an increasingly one-sided case, and because of confirmation bias, you're perceiving that case as balanced and objective. The internet has made this worse through filter bubbles and algorithmic recommendations. You're served content similar to what you've engaged with before, creating an information environment that constantly confirms your existing beliefs. You think you're learning about the world, but you're actually just having your priors reinforced over and over. Let's talk about how emotions hijack your cognition. You'd like to believe you think rationally and then feel emotions based on your thoughts. But it's actually the reverse. Emotions arise first, often for reasons you're unaware of, and they color all your subsequent thinking. When you're in a good mood, everything seems more manageable. Problems seem solvable, people seem friendlier, risks seem acceptable. When you're in a bad mood, everything seems harder. The same problems feel overwhelming, people seem annoying, risks seem unacceptable. Your emotional state is like a filter over reality, changing how you interpret identical information. The affect heuristic means you judge things as good or bad based on how you feel about them, not based on objective analysis of costs and benefits. If something feels good, you overestimate benefits and underestimate risks. If something feels bad, you do the opposite. This is why people are terrible at evaluating risk. Terrorist attacks and plane crashes feel scary, so people overestimate those risks while underestimating actually dangerous things like car accidents and heart disease that don't trigger the same emotional response. Your feelings about risk have almost no correlation with actual statistical risk. Emotional contagion means you catch emotions from other people, like you catch a cold. When you're around anxious people, you become anxious. When you're around excited people, you become excited. This happens through unconscious mimicry of facial expressions, body language, and vocal tones. Within milliseconds of seeing someone smile, your facial muscles start to mimic a smile, and that physical mimicry actually triggers the associated emotion. You're constantly absorbing the emotional states of people around you, and this shapes your mood, your judgments, and your decisions in ways you're completely unaware of. This is why the people you spend time with matter enormously. If you're surrounded by negative, cynical people, you'll become more negative and cynical. If you're surrounded by optimistic, energetic people, you'll become more optimistic and energetic. It's not about consciously adopting their attitudes. It's about unconscious emotional contagion shaping your baseline affective state, which then colors all your cognition. Your social environment is literally changing your brain's default emotional setting. Let's explore decision-making and how bad you are at it. Humans evolved to make fast decisions in environments where immediate survival threats were the main concern. But modern life requires making complex decisions with delayed consequences, and your evolved decision-making systems are poorly suited for this. The result is systematic irrationality. Present bias means you overvalue immediate rewards and undervalue future rewards way more than logic would justify. Rationally, $100 today and $110 in a month should have roughly similar value. The difference is about 40% annual interest, which is good but not transformative. But psychologically, the immediate $100 feels vastly more valuable. This is why people struggle with saving, dieting, exercising, and any behavior where short-term costs produce long-term benefits. Your brain is essentially rigged to favor the present self at the expense of the future self. Loss aversion means losses feel psychologically twice as painful as equivalent gains feel pleasurable. Losing $50 hurts more than gaining $50 feels good. This makes you irrationally risk-averse in certain contexts and irrationally risk in seeking in others. When you're ahead, you become conservative, taking small, sure gains rather than gambling for larger ones. When you're behind, you become reckless, taking long-shot risks to try to get back to even, rather than accepting a smaller certain loss. This is why people hold losing stocks too long hoping they'll recover, and why gamblers chase losses. The pain of accepting a loss drives irrational decision-making. The sunk cost fallacy, which we touched on earlier, makes you continue investing in something because of what you've already invested, even when the rational choice is to abandon it. You sit through a terrible movie because you paid for the ticket. You finish a meal you're not enjoying because you paid for it. You stay in a failing business because of the years you've invested. Rationally, past costs are irrelevant to future decisions. You should only consider future costs and benefits. But psychologically, you can't let go of sunk costs. They feel relevant, so you throw good money after bad, good time after bad, continuing down failing paths, because the alternative is admitting that your previous investment was wasted. Anchoring means the first number you see in a negotiation or price evaluation, even if it's completely arbitrary, shapes your subsequent judgment. If a car is listed at $40,000 and you negotiate down to $35,000, you feel like you got a deal, even if the car's actual value is $30,000. The $40,000 anchor influenced your perception of value. Retailers use this constantly. Original price, $800, on sale for $400. The $800 anchor makes $400 seem reasonable, even if the product was never actually sold at $800 and isn't worth $400. Framing effects mean the way information is presented completely changes your decision, even though the underlying facts are identical. If a medical treatment is described as having a 90% survival rate, people choose it. If the exact same treatment is described as having a 10% mortality rate, people avoid it. Logically, these are identical. Psychologically, they feel completely different. Politicians, marketers, and anyone trying to persuade you know this. They frame information to trigger the response they want. You think you're responding to facts, but you're actually responding to how those facts are packaged. The availability heuristic means you judge the probability of events based on how easily examples come to mind, not based on actual statistics. After a plane crash, people avoid flying because the vivid disaster is mentally available. After a shark attack, people avoid the ocean. But statistically, driving to the airport is more dangerous than the flight, and you're more likely to be killed by a vending machine than a shark. Your sense of risk is driven by the vividness and recency of examples in your memory, which has almost no correlation with actual risk. The news media exploits this constantly by giving massive coverage to rare dramatic events and ignoring common boring dangers, which systematically distorts your risk perception. Now let's discuss how your brain handles complexity, or more accurately, how it doesn't. Humans can hold about 7 pieces of information in working memory at once. When problems exceed this complexity, you resort to simplifications and heuristics that often lead you astray. The halo effect is one example. One positive trait influences your perception of other unrelated traits. Physically attractive people are assumed to be more competent. Articulate people are assumed to be more intelligent. Successful people are assumed to have admirable character. These assumptions are often wrong, but Your brain uses them as shortcuts when evaluating complex multidimensional information about people. The horn effect is the reverse. One negative trait contaminates your perception of everything else. Someone who is unattractive or awkward or has one quality you dislike gets negatively evaluated across the board. This is why first impressions matter so much. Whatever trait is most salient in the first encounter, positive or negative, creates a halo or horn that colors all subsequent information processing. You think you're continually updating your evaluation based on new information, but actually you're mostly confirming the initial impression. Stereotyping is cognitive efficiency taken too far. Your brain uses group membership as a shortcut to make inferences about individuals because evaluating every person from scratch would be cognitively overwhelming. But stereotypes are often inaccurate. They're overgeneralizations based on biased samples, and they create self-fulfilling prophecies. When you expect someone to behave a certain way based on their group membership, you interpret ambiguous behavior as confirming the stereotype, and you behave toward them in ways that elicit stereotype-consistent responses. Stereotypes persist not because they're accurate, but because they're cognitively efficient and self-reinforcing. Let's talk about what actually makes people happy, because most of your assumptions about this are wrong. Psychologists have studied happiness extensively, and the findings consistently contradict what people predict will make them happy. This is called affective forecasting error. You're terrible at predicting what will make you happy and for how long. Major life events, positive or negative, have much smaller and shorter lasting impacts on happiness than people expect. Lottery winners return to their baseline happiness level within a year. People who become paraplegic from accidents also return close to baseline within a year. This isn't to minimize suffering. Trauma has real effects, but the point is humans adapt to circumstances much faster than they expect. You think getting that promotion, buying that house, achieving that goal will make you permanently happier, but research shows the boost is temporary. Within months, you adapt to the new normal and return to approximately your previous happiness level. This is called hedonic adaptation, and it's why pursuing happiness through achievement and acquisition is a treadmill. You keep running but never get anywhere. So, what actually correlates with sustained happiness? Relationships are the strongest predictor. People with close, meaningful relationships are significantly happier than people without them, and this effect doesn't diminish through adaptation. Loneliness is as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Social connection isn't a nice to have, it's a fundamental human need. Yet people consistently undervalue relationships in favor of career achievement and material acquisition, predicting that success will make them happy when the data shows relationships matter far more. Experiences make people happier than possessions. You adapt quickly to new possessions, but memories of experiences often increase in value over time. You selectively remember the positive aspects and forget the negative ones, a phenomenon called rosy retrospection. That trip you took, where it rained half the time and you got food poisoning, in a year you'll remember it fondly, focusing on the adventure and camaraderie. But the new car you bought will just be your car, and soon you'll be annoyed by its flaws and already thinking about what you'll get next. Autonomy, competence, and purpose matter more than wealth beyond a certain threshold. Once basic needs are met and you're not living paycheck to paycheck, additional income has diminishing returns on happiness. Studies show that beyond about $75,000 annual income in the United States, more money doesn't produce more happiness. What does matter is feeling in control of your life, feeling competent at something meaningful, and feeling that your work serves a purpose beyond yourself. People with these three factors are happy even at modest income levels. People without them are unhappy even at high income levels. Yet society is structured to push people toward wealth accumulation and away from autonomy and purpose. You're told to climb the corporate ladder, which often means less autonomy and more time spent on politics and administration rather than doing work you're competent at. You're told to buy a bigger house and a nicer car, which requires more income, which requires more work, which reduces autonomy in relationships. The path society pushes you toward is almost perfectly designed to minimize the actual drivers of happiness while maximizing the things that have minimal impact. Let's explore how your childhood is still running your life, whether you know it or not. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, shows that your early relationships with caregivers create internal working models of relationships that persist throughout life. If your caregivers were consistently responsive and loving, you develop secure attachment. You believe you're worthy of love, you trust that others will be there for you, and you're comfortable with both intimacy and independence. About 60% of people are securely attached. If your caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes responsive, and sometimes neglectful or intrusive, you develop anxious attachment. You crave closeness but fear abandonment. You need constant reassurance, and you interpret ambiguous behavior as rejection. You might be clingy, jealous, or overly accommodating in relationships, driven by deep fear that people will leave you. About 20% of people have anxious attachment. If your caregivers were consistently unresponsive, emotionally unavailable, or rejecting, you develop avoidant attachment. You learn that depending on others leads to disappointment, so you value independence to an extreme degree. You're uncomfortable with intimacy, you suppress emotions, and you withdraw when relationships get too close. You might pride yourself on not needing anyone, but it's actually a defense mechanism from childhood wounds. About 20% of people have avoidant attachment. These attachment patterns are remarkably stable across the lifespan, and they predict relationship outcomes more strongly than almost any other factor. Secure people have longer, more satisfying relationships with less conflict. Anxious people experience more relationship turmoil, more jealousy and insecurity, and often end up with avoidant partners in a painful dynamic where one person pursues closeness while the other withdraws. Avoidant people have shorter relationships and struggle with emotional intimacy even when they want it. Here's the particularly difficult part. Attachment patterns are largely unconscious, and they're activated in close relationships. You might function perfectly well in casual relationships, but when things get serious, your attachment pattern kicks in and drives behavior you can't quite control. Anxious people become needy despite knowing it pushes people away. Avoidant people sabotage promising relationships despite wanting connection. You tell yourself you're different, you've grown, you won't repeat patterns, but under stress, you revert to the strategies you learned in childhood because they're deeply encoded. The good news is attachment patterns can change through sustained, secure relationships or therapy, but it requires becoming aware of your pattern, recognizing how it manifests in behavior, and actively working against ingrained tendencies. Most people never do this work. They just keep repeating the same relationship patterns and wondering why they keep ending up in the same situations with different people. Let's talk about trauma because it's more common than people realize, and it shapes behavior in ways that seem irrational to others but make perfect sense when you understand the underlying mechanism. Trauma isn't just about major events like war or assault, though those certainly qualify. Trauma is any experience that overwhelms your ability to cope and leaves lasting changes in how your nervous system responds to perceived threats. This can come from chronic childhood stress, neglect, bullying, medical procedures, car accidents, or any number of experiences where you felt helpless and in danger. When you experience trauma, your brain encodes not just the event, but the entire context: sounds, smells, sights, physical sensations. Later, when you encounter cues that resemble that context, even slightly, your amygdala triggers a fear response before your conscious mind is even aware of the trigger. This is called a trauma trigger, and it produces intense physiological reactions that feel disproportionate to the current situation. You might experience panic, rage, or complete emotional shutdown in response to something that seems minor to observers, but your nervous system is reacting to a perceived threat based on past experience. People with unprocessed trauma often struggle with emotional regulation. Small stresses produce big reactions. They might be hypervigilant, constantly scanning for danger. They might have trouble sleeping because their nervous system won't downregulate. They might use alcohol, drugs, food, or other substances to manage the constant physiological arousal. From the outside, these behaviors look like personal failings. From the inside, they're attempts to manage a nervous system that's been recalibrated by trauma. Complex trauma from childhood, especially relational trauma from caregivers, is particularly damaging because it affects your developing brain and your fundamental sense of self and safety. If the people who were supposed to protect you were also the source of danger, it creates deep confusion. You can't develop a coherent narrative about safety and threat. You learn that relationships are dangerous, but also that you need relationships to survive. This creates lifelong struggles with trust, boundaries, and emotional regulation. Here's what's important to understand. Trauma behaviors are not character flaws. They're adaptations that made sense in the original trauma context, but now create problems in current contexts where they're no longer needed. The person who's hypervigilant and controlling learned in childhood that letting their guard down led to harm. The person who shuts down emotionally learned that expressing feelings resulted in punishment or neglect. The person who's constantly people-pleasing learned that their value depended on keeping others happy. These strategies helped them survive difficult circumstances, but they now interfere with adult functioning. Healing trauma requires not just insight, but nervous system regulation. Talk therapy alone often isn't sufficient because trauma is encoded at a physiological level. Effective trauma treatment involves body-based approaches that help retrain the nervous system to distinguish between past and present, threat and safety. This might be through EMDR, somatic experiencing, neurofeedback, or other modalities that work with the body's stress response systems. The goal is to help the nervous system understand that the trauma is over, that current life doesn't require constant vigilance or defensive reactions. Now let's discuss personality and how much of it is actually fixed versus changeable. The big 5 personality traits, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, are about 50% heritable according to twin studies. This means genetics account for about half the variation in personality, and environment accounts for the other half. But here's what people misunderstand. Heritable doesn't mean unchangeable. Your personality is relatively stable across adulthood, but it does change gradually. People tend to become more conscientious, agreeable, and emotionally stable as they age. This is called the maturity principle. Life experiences, particularly taking on adult responsibilities like committed relationships and careers, tend to push personality in more mature directions. But these changes are gradual, and most of your core personality is established by your early 20s and remains relatively consistent. What this means practically is that trying to fundamentally change your personality is difficult and often frustrating. If you're highly introverted, you're probably never going to become the life of the party, and pushing yourself in that direction will be exhausting and inauthentic. Better to accept your temperament and structure your life to accommodate it. Find careers and relationships that suit your actual personality rather than the personality you think you should have. However, you can absolutely change behaviors and skills even if underlying traits are stable. An anxious person can learn anxiety management techniques that make them functionally calmer even if they're still dispositionally prone to anxiety. A disagreeable person can learn diplomatic communication even if their first instinct is confrontation. Personality creates tendencies and preferences, but it doesn't determine behavior. You have far more agency over your actions than over your internal disposition. Let's talk about willpower and self-control, because the folk understanding of it is almost completely wrong. People believe willpower is a character trait, that some people have strong willpower and others have weak willpower, and that success comes from exerting willpower to resist temptation. Research shows this is fundamentally mistaken. Willpower is not a trait, it's a limited resource that depletes through use. This is called ego depletion. Every time you resist temptation, make a difficult decision, or exercise self-control, you're using up a finite mental resource. Once that resource is depleted, your ability to exert further self-control drops dramatically. This is why you can be good all day and then binge eat at night. It's why you can resist buying things in the morning but succumb to impulse purchases in the evening. Your willpower tank is empty. This has profound implications. Trying to change multiple habits simultaneously through willpower is almost guaranteed to fail. You are dividing limited self-control resources among multiple challenges. Better to focus on one behavior change at a time and make it automatic before adding another. This is also why stressful life circumstances make it so hard to maintain healthy habits. Stress depletes willpower, leaving nothing left for resisting temptation or making good choices. The people who seem to have great self-control aren't exerting more willpower, they're using less. They've structured their lives to minimize temptation rather than constantly resisting it. They don't keep junk food in the house rather than relying on willpower to avoid eating it. They automate savings rather than deciding each month whether to save. They build routines and habits that make desirable behaviors automatic rather than volitional. Successful self-control is about reducing the need for willpower, not increasing willpower capacity. Habits are behavior patterns that have become automatic through repetition. About 40% of daily behavior is habitual, meaning you're not consciously deciding to do it, you're just executing a learned pattern. This is hugely powerful for behavior change because habits bypass willpower entirely. Once a behavior is habitual, it requires no self-control to execute. This is why building good habits is transformative. You invest willpower upfront to establish the habit, but once it's automatic, it runs on autopilot. The habit loop consists of cue, routine, and reward. A cue triggers the habit, you execute the routine, and you get a reward which reinforces the loop. To build a new habit, you need to establish a clear cue, make the routine as easy as possible initially, and ensure there's a rewarding aspect. To break a bad habit, you need to either remove the cue, replace the routine, or eliminate the reward. Understanding this structure gives you leverage to consciously design your behavior patterns rather than just hoping willpower will carry you through. Let's discuss motivation and why it's so unreliable. People assume motivation is a feeling that precedes action, that you need to feel motivated in order to do things. This is backward. Action often precedes motivation. The act of starting creates momentum, which feels like motivation. Waiting to feel motivated before starting ensures you'll rarely start because motivation is fleeting and unreliable. Intrinsic motivation, doing something because you find it inherently satisfying, is much more sustainable than extrinsic motivation, doing something for external rewards or to avoid punishment. When you're intrinsically motivated, effort feels less effortful. Time passes quickly. You enter flow states where you're fully absorbed. But when you're extrinsically motivated, even simple tasks feel like drudgery. You're constantly monitoring how much longer you have to do this and whether the reward is worth the effort. Here's the problem. Extrinsic rewards can actually undermine intrinsic motivation through the overjustification effect. When you start paying people for activities they previously did for free, they often lose interest in the activity itself and only do it for the payment. The external reward becomes the reason for doing it, replacing intrinsic interest. This is why paying kids for reading can make them read less once payments stop. This is why monetizing hobbies sometimes makes them feel like work rather than play. This has implications for how you structure goals and rewards. If you want sustained behavior change, you need to connect it to intrinsic values and interests rather than just external outcomes. Don't exercise to lose weight, that's purely extrinsic. Find physical activity you genuinely enjoy. Don't learn a skill just for career advancement. Find aspects of the skill itself that interest you. External rewards can jumpstart behavior, but long-term maintenance requires intrinsic connection. Let's talk about status and dominance hierarchies because humans are more driven by status concerns than most people consciously realize. You evolved in small groups where relative status had enormous implications for survival and reproduction. High-status individuals had better access to resources, mates, and social support. Low-status individuals faced deprivation and exclusion. Your brain is wired to constantly track status, both your own and others, and to experience strong emotions around status gains and losses. Much of what looks like irrational behavior makes sense as status competition. Conspicuous consumption, buying expensive things you don't need, is status signaling. You're not buying the thing for its utility, you're buying it to display wealth and taste, which are status markers. This is why people buy luxury brands even when functionally identical, cheaper alternatives exist. The brand is the signal. This is why people care about weddings, houses, cars, and vacations far beyond the actual experience. These are public performances of status. Social media has turned everyday life into a constant status competition. Every post is implicitly or explicitly a claim about status. Look at my accomplishment, my relationship, my lifestyle. Every like and comment is a status currency. The dopamine hit from social validation is the same neurochemistry that rewarded status gains in ancestral environments. This is why social media is so addictive and so psychologically corrosive. You're in a zero-sum status competition with everyone you know plus everyone they know, and the metrics are public and constantly updated. Status anxiety explains an enormous amount of human suffering. People take jobs they hate for titles and salaries that communicate status. They buy houses they can't afford to signal success. They stay in prestigious but unfulfilling careers because admitting it's not working feels like losing status. They compete with friends and family in petty ways they're embarrassed to acknowledge. The need for status is a fundamental drive, but modern society has created arms races where no one can win. No matter how much you achieve, someone has achieved more, and the comparison is unavoidable. The paradox is that pursuing status directly rarely makes you happy. Research shows that people oriented toward status and approval are less happy than people oriented toward autonomy and growth. But your brain keeps telling you that status will make you happy because in ancestral environments, it often did. The mismatch is that modern status games are infinite. They never end, and the goalposts constantly move, whereas ancestral status was in small groups where you could actually reach a stable position. You're running an evolved program designed for a world that no longer exists. Let's discuss something that affects every interaction you have, but that you're mostly unaware of: unconscious bias. Your brain categorizes people automatically based on race, gender, age, attractiveness, and other visible characteristics. These categorizations activate stereotypes and associations that influence your judgments and behavior before you are consciously aware of them. This happens to everyone, including people who consciously reject prejudice and believe in equality. Implicit association tests reveal these unconscious biases by measuring reaction times. If you more quickly associate certain groups with negative attributes or certain groups with positive attributes, it reveals unconscious bias. Most people show in-group preference, favoring people who share their group memberships and having more positive associations with them. White people tend to have implicit pro-white biases. Black people tend to have weaker implicit pro-black biases. likely due to internalized racism from growing up in a society with pervasive negative associations about blackness. These biases don't necessarily predict overt discrimination, but they do influence subtle behaviors like who you hire, whose opinions you take seriously, who you perceive as threatening, and who you extend benefit of the doubt to. Microaggressions are the behavioral manifestation of unconscious bias. Being repeatedly asked where you're really from, having your competence questioned in ways that others aren't, being mistaken for service staff or other people of your race, being interrupted or talked over, having your experiences invalidated or minimized. Each individual incident might seem minor, but the cumulative effect is significant psychological stress and the constant message that you don't fully belong. The people committing microaggressions often don't realize they're doing it and would be horrified to think they're being discriminatory. That's why they're called microaggressions rather than overt discrimination. The bias is operating below conscious awareness. Stereotype threat shows how awareness of stereotypes impairs performance. When you're reminded of a negative stereotype about your group before a test or task, your performance suffers. Women reminded of gender before a math test perform worse. Black students reminded of race before an academic test perform worse. The mechanism isn't that the stereotypes are true. It's that the anxiety and cognitive load of worrying about confirming the stereotype consumes mental resources that would otherwise go toward the task. You're monitoring your performance, worrying about how you're being perceived, managing the stereotype in addition to just doing the task. This additional burden is enough to create the performance gap that then seems to confirm the stereotype. These effects accumulate across a lifetime to create real disparities in outcomes. It's not that discrimination is always overt and intentional. It's that thousands of small biases, microaggressions, and stereotype threats add up to meaningful disadvantage. This is why diversity initiatives that focus only on hiring without addressing workplace culture often fail. You can hire diverse employees, but if the culture subjects them to constant microaggressions and stereotype threat, they'll underperform and leave. Addressing unconscious bias requires first acknowledging that you have them. Everyone does. It's how human cognition works. Second, you need to create external structures that counteract bias. Blind resume reviews where identifying information is removed. Structured interviews where all candidates answer the same questions in the same order. Diverse decision-making groups where no single person's biases dominate. You can't eliminate unconscious bias through willpower alone, but you can design processes that minimize its impact. Let's talk about something that controls behavior more than most people realize: the power of the situation. The fundamental attribution error we discussed earlier leads people to overestimate personality and underestimate situational influence. But social psychology has repeatedly demonstrated that situations can make ordinary people behave in extraordinary ways, both good and bad. The Stanford prison experiment, despite methodological controversies, demonstrated that college students randomly assigned to play guards in a simulated prison quickly adopted authoritarian and abusive behaviors, while those assigned to be prisoners became passive and depressed. The situation, the roles, the power dynamics transformed how people behaved within days. The Milgram experiments showed ordinary people willing to inflict harm when authority figures directed them to do so. The bystander effect shows that people are less likely to help someone in need when other bystanders are present, each person assuming someone else will help. These aren't demonstrations of human depravity. They're demonstrations of situational power. Small changes in context produce large changes in behavior. This means you're more influenced by your environment than you realize, and you have less consistent character than you believe. You think you'd be the person who speaks up, who intervenes, who resists authority. But research suggests most people wouldn't, not because they're bad people, but because situations are powerful and humans are social conformists. This has practical implications. If you want to change behavior, Change the situation. Obesity isn't primarily a willpower problem. It's a food environment problem. Put people in environments with constant availability of hyperpalatable food engineered to override satiety signals, and of course, they'll overeat. Change the environment, smaller plates, less visible food, healthier defaults, and behavior changes without requiring willpower. Crime isn't primarily a character problem, it's an opportunity plus incentive calculation. Change the situation so that crime has lower expected value, better legal opportunities, stronger social bonds, more capable guardianship of targets, and crime rates drop. You're constantly being shaped by situations, social norms, default options, and environmental cues. Recognizing this gives you power to intentionally design situations that push you toward desired behaviors. Join groups where your desired behavior is the norm. Create physical environments that make good choices easy and bad choices hard. Establish social contracts and accountability that change the situational incentives. Situational design is more effective than willpower or character building for most behavior change. Now let's discuss something uncomfortable. How much of life is luck versus merit? People desperately want to believe that outcomes are primarily determined by individual merit, effort, and choice. This is called the just world hypothesis, the belief that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. It's psychologically comforting because it implies you're in control of your fate, and it justifies existing inequalities as earned rather than random or systemic. But research consistently shows that luck plays a massive role in life outcomes. Your genetics, your parents, your country of birth, your birth order, your health, the era you're born into, the opportunities you're exposed to, the people you happen to meet, these are all luck, and they have enormous impact. Studies that try to isolate the effect of individual effort from circumstantial factors find that circumstance explains far more variance in outcomes than most people assume. Robert Frank's research on success and luck shows that in winner-take-all markets, tiny initial advantages, which are often random, compound through positive feedback loops into massive outcome differences. The best performing person isn't always the most talented. They're often someone with good talent who got lucky breaks that created momentum. Early recognition leads to more opportunities, which lead to more success, which leads to more recognition. The person who didn't get that initial break might be just as talented, but never gets the compounding advantages. This doesn't mean effort doesn't matter. Obviously it does. But effort interacts with luck. You can work incredibly hard and not succeed if you're unlucky, and you can work moderately hard and succeed tremendously if you are lucky. The problem is that successful people systematically underestimate their luck and overestimate their merit because of self-serving bias. When things go well, you attribute it to your skill and effort. When things go poorly, you attribute it to bad luck or unfair circumstances. This double standard makes successful people believe they earned everything they have, and struggling people believe they're primarily victims of circumstance, when reality is that luck plays a major role in both. Acknowledging the role of luck doesn't diminish achievement. It contextualizes it. It makes you more humble about success and more compassionate about others' struggles. It also makes you realize that optimizing for luck is as important as optimizing for skill. Luck is partially about being exposed to variance, taking chances, meeting people, trying things, moving to places with opportunities. Luck is also about being prepared to capitalize on random opportunities when they arise. You can't control whether opportunities come, but you can control whether you're ready when they do. Let's talk about meaning and purpose, because research shows this is one of the most important factors for psychological well-being, yet it's something modern life systematically undermines. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, argued that humans can endure almost any suffering if they have a sense of meaning and purpose, but they struggle even in comfortable circumstances if life feels meaningless. Meaning comes from connection to something larger than yourself. This might be relationships, community, spiritual or religious beliefs, creative work, service to others, pursuit of knowledge, anything where you're contributing to or participating in something that transcends your individual existence. Research consistently shows that people who report a strong sense of meaning and purpose are happier, healthier, more resilient to stress, and live longer than people who feel their lives lack meaning. Modern consumer culture actively undermines meaning by promoting self-centered hedonism as the path to happiness. Buy things, seek pleasure, prioritize your individual desires and comfort. This produces temporary satisfaction at best and actively creates meaninglessness. When life is about you and your pleasure, there's no larger narrative to connect to, no purpose that survives setbacks and suffering. You're on a hedonic treadmill, seeking the next pleasure to stave off emptiness. The paradox is that pursuing happiness directly rarely produces it, but pursuing meaning often produces happiness as a byproduct. When you're engaged in purposeful work, meaningful relationships, or service to something larger than yourself, happiness emerges from the engagement itself. You're not happy because you're seeking happiness. You're happy because you're absorbed in meaningful activity. This is the difference between pleasure and fulfillment. Pleasure is ephemeral and self-focused. Fulfillment comes from purpose and connection. Finding meaning isn't about discovering some predetermined purpose. It's about creating meaning through your choices and commitments. You make your life meaningful by dedicating yourself to people, projects, values, or communities that matter to you. The content is less important than the commitment. Someone devoted to their family has meaning. Someone devoted to their craft has meaning. Someone devoted to social justice has meaning. What creates meaninglessness is lack of commitment to anything beyond immediate self-interest. Let's discuss mortality and how awareness of death shapes psychology. Terror management theory posits that much of human behavior is driven by managing the anxiety that comes from knowing we're going to die. Humans are uniquely aware of their mortality, and this awareness would be paralyzing if not for psychological defense mechanisms. Culture provides one defense: the belief that you're part of something that transcends your individual existence, a nation, religion, ideology, or legacy. Self-esteem provides another defense. If you're living up to cultural values, you symbolically transcend death by being part of something immortal. When mortality is made salient, reminded of death, people double down on cultural worldviews and self-esteem. They become more patriotic, more religious, more hostile to outgroups who threaten their worldview. They pursue status and legacy more aggressively. They cling tighter to belief systems that promise symbolic immortality. Much of politics, religion, and culture war can be understood as mortality management. People aren't just defending policies, they're defending the psychological structures that protect them from death anxiety. This has a dark side. Reminders of death make people more prejudiced, more aggressive toward outsiders, more punitive toward moral transgressors, more conformist to in-group norms. It's as if the mind says, my worldview keeps me safe from death anxiety. Anyone who threatens it threatens my psychological stability, so I must defend it and attack threats. This is why religious and ideological conflicts are so intractable and vicious. They're not just intellectual disagreements, they're clashes between terror management systems. The positive side is that mortality awareness can also inspire growth and authenticity. When people contemplate death in a reflective rather than defensive way, they often become clearer about what matters. They prioritize relationships over achievement, experiences over possessions, authenticity over approval. The awareness that life is finite can be liberating, freeing you from trivial concerns and social expectations. It's the difference between defensive denial of death and honest acceptance of mortality. Many philosophies and spiritual traditions teach that accepting death is key to living well. When you truly accept that you will die, that everyone you love will die, that nothing lasts forever, it paradoxically makes life more precious rather than less. You stop postponing what matters. You stop living according to others' expectations. You become more present because you recognize that this moment is all you ever really have. Death is not the enemy of life, it's what gives life urgency and meaning. Let's talk about addiction because it reveals important truths about how the brain works. Addiction is often moralized as a character flaw or failure of willpower, but neuroscience shows it's a hijacking of the brain's motivation and reward systems. Addictive substances and behaviors trigger massive dopamine release, far beyond what natural rewards produce. Your brain interprets this as signal that this substance or behavior is incredibly important for survival, more important than food or sex, and it reorganizes priorities accordingly. With repeated exposure, the brain adapts to the flood of dopamine by downregulating receptors. This is tolerance. You need more of the substance to get the same effect. Simultaneously, the brain's reward response to normal pleasures diminishes. Food, social connection, accomplishments. These produce less satisfaction than they used to because your reward system has been recalibrated around the addictive substance. This is anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from normal activities, and it's a core feature of addiction. Withdrawal happens because your brain has adapted to function with the substance present. Remove it suddenly and you experience the opposite of its effects, plus the deficit from downregulated receptors. Alcohol withdrawal produces anxiety and hyperactivity because your brain compensated for alcohol's depressant effects by upregulating excitatory systems. Remove the alcohol and those compensations produce dangerous overactivity. This isn't weakness, it's neurochemistry. Here's what's crucial to understand. Addiction is not about the substance, it's about the person and their circumstances. The rat park experiments showed that rats in enriched environments with social connection and activities rarely self-administered addictive drugs, while isolated rats in barren cages compulsively self-administered to the point of death. Human addiction follows similar patterns. People with meaningful relationships, purposeful work, and stable lives are much less likely to develop addiction than people who are isolated, traumatized, or purposeless. Addiction is often an attempt to self-medicate pain or fill emptiness. This means effective addiction treatment requires addressing the underlying causes, not just the substance use. Treating only the physical dependence through detox has high relapse rates because the circumstances that drove addiction remain unchanged. Effective treatment addresses trauma, builds social support, creates purpose and structure, treats co-occurring mental health issues. Addiction is a symptom, not just a disease. Treating symptoms without addressing causes rarely works. This also means that viewing addiction as moral failure is both wrong and counterproductive. Shame and stigma make addiction worse by increasing isolation and self-hatred, which are often what drove addiction in the first place. Compassionate approaches that treat addiction as a health issue and address underlying needs have much better outcomes than punitive approaches that criminalize or moralize it. Let's discuss how technology is changing human psychology in ways we're only beginning to understand. Smartphones and social media have been around for only about 15 years, but they've fundamentally altered how people allocate attention, form relationships, and construct identity. The human brain did not evolve for the stimulus environment these technologies create, and the mismatch is producing measurable psychological effects. Attention spans are measurably declining. The constant availability of novel stimuli trains your brain to seek frequent hits of newness. This makes sustained attention on single tasks more difficult. You're constantly pulling your attention away to check notifications, scroll feeds, or just see what else is happening. Your ability to be bored, to sit with nothing happening, has atrophied. Boredom is actually important for creativity and reflection. It's when your brain processes information and makes connections. Eliminating boredom through constant stimulation may be reducing creative and reflective capacity. Social media creates what's called context collapse. where audiences that should be separate, family, co-workers, friends from different life stages, are all collapsed into one public feed. This makes authentic self-expression difficult. You're performing for multiple audiences simultaneously, so you default to an inoffensive public persona that satisfies no one fully. The result is less intimacy even as you're more connected. Hundreds of weak ties replace fewer strong bonds. Social comparison has been amplified to a pathological degree. You're not just comparing yourself to people you know, you're comparing to influencers, celebrities, and idealized versions that are heavily curated and edited. Research shows that heavy social media use correlates with depression and anxiety, particularly in young people, and the mechanism appears to be upward social comparison and FOMO, fear of missing out. You're constantly seeing highlight reels of others' lives while living the behind the scenes of your own, which creates the illusion that everyone else is happier and more successful. The like and comment mechanisms create variable ratio reinforcement schedules, the most addictive type of reinforcement. You don't know when you'll get validation, but you might get it anytime you check, so you check constantly. This is the same psychology that makes slot machines addictive. The dopamine hit from social validation is training your brain to constantly seek approval, making you more sensitive to social rejection and more dependent on external validation for self-worth. We're raising the first generation that had smartphones through adolescence, the period when identity forms and social skills develop. We don't yet know the full long-term effects, but early data is concerning. Rates of anxiety and depression in teens have spiked since 2010, corresponding with smartphone adoption. Suicide rates have increased. Sleep has declined because screens disrupt circadian rhythms, and teens are staying up engaging with social media. Face-to-face social skills may be underdeveloped because so much socializing happens through screens. The question isn't whether technology is good or bad, it's how to use it in ways that support human flourishing, rather than exploit psychological vulnerabilities. This requires conscious choices about when and how you use technology. Boundaries around checking email and social media. Protecting time for sustained attention and face-to-face relationships. Recognizing when you're using technology as avoidance or distraction versus when it's genuinely useful. The technology isn't going away, so the burden is on individuals to develop healthier relationships with it. Let's talk about something that affects every area of life, but that most people misunderstand: intelligence and what it actually means. IQ tests measure a specific type of cognitive ability, primarily abstract reasoning, pattern recognition, and processing speed. These abilities are real. They correlate with academic and professional success in certain domains, and they're partially heritable. But intelligence is far more multifaceted than IQ captures. Emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions in yourself and others, predicts life outcomes at least as well as IQ in most domains. People with high emotional intelligence build better relationships, handle conflict more effectively, motivate themselves and others, and navigate social hierarchies successfully. You can be brilliant analytically, but emotionally incompetent, and it will limit you severely. Practical intelligence, the ability to solve real-world problems in specific contexts, is different from academic intelligence. Someone can be extremely smart in a classroom, but struggle to apply knowledge in messy, real situations that don't have clear right answers. Conversely, someone can have modest academic ability, but be extremely effective at reading situations, understanding people, and finding creative solutions to practical problems. The fixed versus growth mindset research by Carol Dweck shows that beliefs about intelligence matter as much as intelligence itself. People who believe intelligence is fixed, you're either smart or not, tend to avoid challenges that might reveal limitations. They see effort as evidence of inadequacy. If you have to try hard, it means you're not naturally talented. This creates self-handicapping and avoidance of growth opportunities. People who believe intelligence is malleable, that abilities can be developed through effort, embrace challenges, persist through setbacks, and view effort as the path to mastery. They outperform people with higher initial ability but fixed mindsets. The problem is that modern education and parenting often reinforce fixed mindsets through praise focused on traits rather than effort. Telling a child they're so smart creates pressure to maintain that identity, which makes them avoid challenges where they might fail and lose the smart label. Praising effort and strategy instead, you worked really hard, you tried a different approach, creates a growth mindset where challenges are opportunities rather than threats. This extends beyond childhood. Your beliefs about whether your abilities are fixed or developable shape how you approach every challenge in life. If you believe you either have talent for something or you don't, you'll give up quickly when things are hard. If you believe competence is built through practice, you'll persist. The research is clear that almost any complex skill is primarily a function of practice, quality, and quantity, not innate talent. The few exceptions are domains with extreme physical requirements, but even there, mental skills and strategy matter enormously. Let's discuss consciousness and the hard problem of understanding subjective experience. You have a first-person inner life, qualia, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the what it's like to be you. Science can explain neural correlates of consciousness, which brain states correspond to which experiences, but it hasn't explained why those neural states produce subjective experience at all. Why isn't there just information processing without the lights on inside? This is called the hard problem of consciousness, and it remains deeply mysterious. Some theories propose that consciousness is fundamental, panpsychism, and even simple systems have some form of experience. Others propose that consciousness emerges from complex information integration. Still others suggest it's an illusion, there's no unified experiencer, just disparate processes creating the false appearance of unity. None of these theories have definitive evidence, and it's not clear what evidence could resolve the question. What's practically important is that your conscious experience is far less in control than it feels. Most of brain activity is unconscious. Your conscious mind is receiving a heavily filtered and interpreted version of reality, not direct access. The feeling of unified consciousness is itself a construction, your brain stitching together disparate processes into a narrative of a single experiencer. Split brain research shows this vividly. When the hemispheres can't communicate, they operate independently, and the verbal left hemisphere makes up stories to explain what the right hemisphere is doing. Free will is another philosophical problem with psychological implications. Do you actually choose your actions, or is choice an illusion created by deterministic brain processes you're not aware of? The Libet experiments suggest your brain decides before you're conscious of deciding. But does that mean you don't have free will, or just that your conscious awareness of decisions is delayed? This gets into deep philosophical territory, but practically believing in free will versus determinism affects behavior. People primed to believe in determinism behave less ethically and put in less effort. Consistent with the idea that if outcomes are predetermined, why bother trying or being moral? Regardless of the philosophical truth, operating as if you have agency, as if your choices matter, produces better outcomes than operating as if you're a passive observer. This might be a useful fiction. You might not have libertarian free will in some ultimate sense, but you're a decision-making system whose decisions are influenced by beliefs, values, and deliberation. That's agency enough for practical purposes. In conclusion, psychology reveals that you're far less rational, far less in control, far less unique, and far less aware of your own mind than you intuitively believe. Your memories are reconstructed fictions. Your decisions are made unconsciously and explained post hoc. Your political and moral beliefs are rationalizations of emotional reactions. Your happiness is less dependent on external circumstances and more dependent on relationships and meaning than you expect. Your behavior is shaped more by situations and luck than by character. Your attention, relationships, and sense of reality are being reshaped by technologies that exploit psychological vulnerabilities. But this knowledge isn't meant to be nihilistic or disempowering. Understanding these psychological facts gives you leverage. You can start questioning your own certainty and making better decisions. You can stop waiting for willpower and start designing situations. You can recognize manipulation and influence in yourself and others. You can stop pursuing happiness through achievement and acquisition and start building meaning through connection and purpose. You can accept that much of life is luck and circumstance, which makes you more humble about success and more compassionate about struggle. Your mind is not your servant. It's an evolved system with its own agenda, shaped by selection pressures from a world that no longer exists. But you can work with your psychology rather than against it. You can be aware of biases without being ruled by them. You can build habits that override impulses. You can create meaning in a universe that doesn't provide it. You can accept mortality without being paralyzed by it. You can form genuine connections despite technology that promotes shallow interaction. The unexamined life may not be worth living, but the examined life reveals some uncomfortable truths. You're less in control than you think. Your sense of self is partly fictional. Much of what drives you operates below conscious awareness. But this examination also reveals possibilities. Once you understand the operating system, you can hack it. You can be the person who speaks up when everyone else conforms. You can be the one who resists authority when authority is wrong. You can build the life that actually makes you happy rather than the life that society says should make you happy. Psychology doesn't tell you what to value or how to live. It just reveals how the machinery works. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. But ignore it at your peril, because everyone else trying to influence you, marketers, politicians, social media platforms, manipulative individuals, they understand these principles and they're using them on you. The question is whether you'll remain unconscious and manipulated or become conscious and deliberate. Now you know. What you do next will reveal more about your psychology than anything in this video.